One of the reasons that I'm really interested in this, I've been an astronomer for over 30 years, so I'm quite often out in the middle of nowhere, on my own with a telescope. If anyone is going to see a UFO, surely it's going to be me. Right? I am a prime target for an abduction, okay? So why haven't I had one? Why not me? What is it? Do they not want me? Why won't they give me an anal probe? Come on, I want this. I want to find out what people are experiencing. But I guess I'm just not that kind of person. And that really interests me, you know? Why doesn't it happen to me? And certainly the Anamnesis project, where you look at the life experiences of some people, it's almost as if there is a category of people that strange things happen to, and I guess I'm not in that category. Well, my name's Dave Newton. I'm one of Buford's science consultants. My specialist subject is astronomy. So what I'm going to be doing today is talking about really a review of the last sort of 50 years of ufology to time with the anniversary of Buford. And in particular the astronomical viewpoint on this and the extraterrestrial hypothesis, what the latest thinking is on that, and then maybe a few predictions for the next 50 years.
Right. Interestingly enough, I was listening to Brian Cox talking about exoplanets a few months back. Is this going to change the way people think about the fact that yes, there could be life beyond this planet, and more of a kind of physical belief in UFOs that they are coming from a long way away, or are we going to still stick with the pretty much kind of internalizing and maybe the spiritual aspect? Do you think that will change over the next few years?
It's hard to tell how it's going to affect it. In terms of the science value here, I think what we've been doing over the last few years is finally putting some real numbers into the Drake equation, that long equation that determines how many civilizations there might be out there in space. We've now got the technology to pin down some of those numbers. So this is great. The Kepler spacecraft has come up with a list of about 2,500 potential planets in a reasonably small part of the sky. So we can put some real numbers now into that equation. I think planets and life out there might be very, very common. I think everyone's coming round to this viewpoint that actually it might be very common indeed. But you've still got that question about how do they get here and how much of this figures into the UFO phenomenon. And I can't see there being a great deal of impact on ufology. But it certainly does give you a better perspective on the possibility of life out there.
How are you going to start the lecture today? What's your first point of call?
First port of call is just a little bit of a recap. So the roots of modern ufology, how the extraterrestrial hypothesis has run through ufology as a whole. Might not necessarily have been a good thing, but it certainly runs through the heart of ufology, and America has driven this subject for a long, long time. So I'll start with that and see what the latest findings are, and then sort of progress a bit wider and see how this sort of impacts the whole of ufology.
Yeah, you're an astronomer.
Yes.
So what kind of percentage is it that comes up, do you think, of astronomical sightings instead of UFOs?
It's a very high percentage, I will say. You hear this percentage banded around quite often. It's 95% of sightings are misperceptions. And I disagree with that, because I think the actual percentage of unknowns is a lot higher, purely because the amount of information we get on a sighting isn't enough to conclusively say what it is. A lot of sighting reports are so vague, you just can't pin it down to anything. So for all it probably is something mundane, this 95% quote that's been around for years and years and years, I think that's just a bit of spin by ufologists to make themselves more accepted by the scientific community, shall we say. I think the true number of known reports is actually a lot lower than that. But that's not to say that there are some, a lot of really mysterious sightings out there. We just don't have enough information to go on a lot of the time.
Have you written any books on the subject?
Oh, no, not me. Maybe one day. I used to produce a magazine called Strange Days with Heather Dixon. We did a lot of work back in the early and the mid-1990s. But the late 90s onwards, no, I haven't written a lot, unfortunately. I've toyed with the idea of starting Strange Days again periodically. So yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah, I mean the trend, is probably quite obvious now that the people into UFOs went up in the 90s, possibly because of things like the X-Files and
Yes.
media coverage and all the magazines in the shops, and it seems to have dipped in the 2000s because of reality hitting a bit more, maybe the terrorism of the world and things like that. Recently there's been another upsurge. Have you recognised this at all?
This goes in fits and starts, and I think there was a real bubble back in the 90s there with the X-Files in particular, and there was such a surge of interest, and at some point that bubble had to pop, and you had this massive sort of dip in interest. I think people just got sick of it, but people are always seeing these things. There's a constant level of UFO activity, so the sightings are always there, the events are always there, so people are always going to be interested in it, and yeah, we're seeing that interest rise again now.
Is there any particular case that you've come across that you just think, that there's something about this case that makes you really think that there could be some possibility of something else going on here?
Oh, thinking back through the years, there's been a lot of cases where, particularly the high strangeness cases, and what you find is that people have quite often a lifetime of strange experiences, and it's not just UFOs. You've got this link with a lot of other paranormal and strange phenomena. And that really interests me, is trying to pin down that link. What is it that ties all of these phenomena together? Mm-hmm. So you can probably tell from that answer, I'm not a huge fan of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Mm-hmm. It's not strange enough. There are a lot of other things going on here, which we really need to explore, but there is some really good science hiding in all of this data, I'm sure of it. It's just trying to pin it down. It's it's like that squidgy pea, you put your thumb on it and it just pings off in some direction. As soon as you try and nail it down, it disappears again.
Do you think science is going to crack this, though, eventually?
Possibly. I would like to think so. So much of this relies on witness testimony rather than hard physical evidence that you can apply science to. It's more like a police investigation. So it's more like forensic science, shall we say. It's trying to piece everything together with the witness testimony. So, I'd like to think that science will play a part in solving part of the mystery, but I think that there are several different phenomena all playing a part in this. And if we just concentrate on one, like the extraterrestrial hypothesis, you're never going to solve it properly.
What other areas do you think would be explanations to a lot of the sightings that we see out there?
Well, my belief is that there are a lot of things flying around of an earthly nature that we're not allowed to know about. Of course, the military will use this to their advantage. They've got experimental aircraft, they have to fly things around, they have to do trials, and people are going to see them. So what's the best way of trying to hide that? If you can fob it off as, it's a UFO report, then. I think there is evidence out there that the military are quite happy to use the UFO phenomenon as a cover as and when necessary. And recent events like the Dudley Dorito, this triangular craft that's been seen over the Midlands, you have to wonder if maybe this is some kind of military aeroplane that there are trials on. But there's a lot of other things there. Earth lights are something that I'm very interested in as well. I think there's a link with geology, and there is some very good science in there. You can use science on that. So earth lights, earthquake lights, that type of phenomenon, very, very interesting, and I'm sure that's played a part in some major cases over the years.
So there are lots of patterns, aren't there, that are occurring. We're listening to a speaker right now who's saying that he's seen an orb in a wood, and he's taking pictures of it, and it's a milky white, orb, the size of a tennis ball, and it's floating along. That to me sounds like it's an earth light of some kind, but of course we don't fully understand what they are or if that's the case yet. But do you think there is some kind of a geological, connection there?
Yes, I think you look at Project Hessdalen, there are places, the Martha Lights in Texas, there are places where there are these light phenomena. They won't appear on demand.
Could you tell us about the project, Hessdalen?
I don't know an awful lot, to be honest, about Project Hessdalen. A few years ago I might have been able to tell you more, but it's been a while since I've looked at it, to be honest. But you do get these places around the world where lights are frequently seen. They won't appear on demand, but they are frequently seen. So what causes them? Where do they come from? It's obviously some kind of natural product of the Earth itself. Paul Devereux is one of the experts on this, and unfortunately is not at this conference. I think he was originally down to speak here, but it's a great shame that he isn't, because I'm a big fan of Paul's. But yeah, you look at these things like ball lightning, earth lights, earthquake lights, will-o'-the-wisps. There are these natural light phenomena. There are these natural light phenomena that have to play a part in the UFO phenomenon.
Mm. What methods will you apply to find out the truth in this matter?
All we can do, I think, is carry on in the same vein that we are now. These places like Hessdalen, if you set up projects there to try and capture these light phenomena, there's obviously work that you can do in the laboratory. It's getting the funding for it, that's the problem. And ufology, I heard a great phrase about ufology. Someone called it flypaper for the absurd. There are no boundaries to it, you get all of these things like cattle mutilations and abductions and ley lines, crop circles. They all kind of get stuck on this subject of ufology, and it gets tarnished to some degree. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those subjects, but it's so broad and so wide-ranging, it gets tarnished. So trying to get funding for something like this is extremely difficult. So again, all credit to people like Paul Devereux, who've persevered and managed to try and do some real field experiments to capture these things. I think that's all we can do. We can, try and maintain the interest in it, try and push for funding for it, and just keep analysing witness reports, and ultimately patterns may become clear.
On a kind of day-to-day basis, what is it that you like to do as a person? Is it always science-based, always astronomy-based, or...?
Well, my day job is in IT development. It pays the bills. My spare time, most of it is spent with astronomy. I spend a lot of time up at Kielder Observatory in Northumberland. It's a fantastic place, and if anyone's in Northumberland and they get a chance, I would recommend visiting it. So have a look on the website, just Google Kielder Observatory and see if you can get booked onto one of the visits up there, one of the talks. It's a great place, and that's what I do. And it's not just pure science. You get the funny feeling when you observe the sky from a site like that, or through a really big telescope. You get that connection with the universe. It's more than just science. So taking astrophotographs as well, there's an art that goes with it. So there's certainly an artistic and a spiritual dimension that goes with this.
Just when you look up at the sky, from my bedroom, I often play this. I just open up the window and I'm looking at whatever's happening. So it's a meteor storm, like from the other night, or it might be a full moon or whatever. And you just think, right, from here to that moon, there was nothing in the way. I mean, obviously there's a belt of ozone or whatever, but if you just kept going, I could hit the moon right there, and I could hit that planet there, and there is this direct contact with visually. We can see things. I mean, how excited are you about the fact that Io's is quite an active moon now? I mean, how did you feel when you first heard about that, for instance?
You're going back in time now, really, to the Voyager missions when they discovered that Io was first volcanically active. This tidal heating from Jupiter that keeps it molten inside. It's wacky stuff, all of these discoveries, they're finding things that were only in sci-fi before. There are this multitude of worlds out there. I mean, these hot Jupiters, for example, are finding these really large planets orbiting very close to stars. Nobody thought that they would exist. They should have evaporated away. But we seem to live in a universe full of these things. So there's some really wacky things out there, and it was that quote from Haldane always comes in, doesn't it? The universe is not only queerer than we imagine, it's queerer than we can imagine. And that's what's great. Every time we discover something that's just a little bit outside of our imagination. It's great, it's broadening our horizons the whole time.